Hello and welcome from the University of Washington School of Medicine Office of Admissions. We're here today with our E27 Admissions Cycle Essentials. The goal of this video is to share the most essential information you need for the upcoming 2027-28 medical school application cycle when applying to the University of Washington School of Medicine. We're going to talk about the new things for this year, as well as the specifics of our process. But we won't be covering things like application advice or what the committee is looking for in our applications. We do provide that information in other videos and on our website, so we encourage you to check those out. But now I'm going to turn things over to my colleagues with the updates.
Thank you, Sarah. So before we go into the details about this process, I just want to give some quick updates about this E27 application cycle. We have some new secondary application questions, which we will go into more details on the next slide. One thing we do want to let folks know is that starting this application cycle, we will process applications when we have received all pending or future MCAT scores. So we want to make sure that your application is complete and accurate before we begin our review. Now, keep in mind this applies to all applicants regardless of legal state of residence. And finally, just a reminder, when you take the MCAT, it is good for 3 years. So for this E27 application cycle, we will consider MCAT scores from the calendar years 2024, 2025, and 2026. We have some new secondary application questions, and these are all additional essays, and they are short essays. First one is describe how your experiences have prepared you to work effectively with classmates, patients, and colleagues from a wide variety of cultures, belief systems, socioeconomic backgrounds, geography, and lived experiences. The second one is describe an academic, personal, or professional challenge you have encountered, how you responded, and what you learned from facing the challenge. How did it prepare you to be a physician? And then the final new essay question is, why WWAMI? Describe how your preparation, service, and career goals align with the cohort that you are applying to. So what that means is that if you are a Wyoming resident applying for the Wyoming cohort, we want to talk about how your preparation and service and career goals align with the Wyoming cohort. If you are a Montana applicant, then we will want you to talk about how your preparation, service, and career goals align with the Montana cohort, and so on. To see all of the required secondary application essays, please check out our admissions webpage for more details. Now, something to be mindful of is that rolling admissions is different everywhere. And while the University of Washington School of Medicine does have rolling admissions, we keep seats open in the cohort until the very end after we interview all the applicants that we've invited. It is advantageous to apply before the deadline, which you can see on this graphic, but you do not need to apply on the very first day that the applications open. We know that AMCAT's application opens this month, but you don't have to have it in right away. We want to really stress that a good application is more important than an early application. So if there is anything that you want to have the committee consider as part of your candidacy, you want to make sure that that is included in your application before you submit it to the medical schools. Also, just be mindful of time zones. AMCAS is on Eastern Standard Time. We're on Pacific Time. So make sure that time zone is not something that's going to keep you from being considered for admission. And also, don't fret if you get your application in early and then you don't hear back, we actually will send out secondaries sometime starting mid-July and to early August. And also keep in mind that decisions are based on the cohort. So depending on which cohort you're applying to, you may get a hear back on your application uh, within that time frame. Everything is going to be decided by the end of February, and we will notify everyone about their application status, be it accepted into class, on the alternate list, or not accepted. So next, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to my colleague, Sonia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video. So we're going to talk just a little bit more about what WWAMI is, because we always receive questions about like, what does that mean? Do I have to do something special to apply to WWAMI? And the short answer is that the UWSOM and WWAMI are the same thing. So WWAMI is an acronym for Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho. Those are our partner states for our program. But in MCAS, you will just select the University of Washington School of Medicine to apply. And then your cohort that you're considered to is assigned based on your legal state of residence in MCAS. So not your address, not where you grew up, anything else, but your legal state of residence in AMCAS. Applicants can only be considered for one cohort. So we know that sometimes people may be able to qualify for legal residency in multiple states, depending on the residency requirements in those different states. But you have to choose one in MCAS, and that is how we process your application. Anybody who doesn't have a legal state of residence, if it's blank, is considered as an out-of-region applicant. And then everyone whose legal state of residence is not Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho is considered as an out-of-region applicant. Important to know that for Washington applicants, in the secondary application, you have the choice to choose between the Spokane Foundation site and the Seattle Foundation site. You do have to choose, so you can't be considered for both. And you only get that choice if you're a Washington resident. Out-of-region applicants and MSTP applicants are all part of the Seattle cohort by default. Also important to know that for residency purposes and for sort of application consideration purposes, we can only consider people who are U.S. citizens or permanent residents, or if you're a DACA recipient from one of our WWAMI states. Something we get a lot of questions about, and importantly so, because it really matters in terms of our application process, is the sort of the definition of out-of-region applicants versus WWAMI applicants. We have a really helpful website on our webpage on our website about this that really describes like, here's how we consider the two different sets of applicants and like what the eligibility requirements are. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at that if you are not sure about your sort of how your residency would be qualified. But again, how we define that is that legal residence in AMCAS. And know that the out-of-region applicants make up about 75% of our applicant pool, but we only accept less than 1% of those applicants. Most of those cuts happen prior to the secondary application. So just know that if you are an out-of-region applicant who has been invited to complete the secondary application, you're well past many of the sort of hurdles in terms of being considered for admission. Last clarifying point here is that out-of-region applicants have to choose between applying to the MD only program at the University of Washington or the MD PhD or MSTP program. WWAMI applicants are eligible to apply to both. You must designate in AMCAS which application type you want. So if you are a WWAMI applicant who wants to apply to MSTP and MD, you need to have the AMCAS application say that you're considering the MD PhD application type.
Here we can see a bit about the difference between what the process looks like for WWAMI applicants and for those applying from out of the region. So the first step is the same for everyone, and that is to submit your primary application via MCAS. Regardless of your legal state of residence, everyone does that step. So you can see the two little lines there, the OOR for out of region and WWAMI for all of our in-state, in-region applicants. There's an initial academic screen. We're looking at your undergraduate cumulative GPA, your MCAT scores, and also your BCPM, which is the math and science GPA. You can see that there are slightly different scores that we're looking for this cut, depending on whether you are a WWAMI applicant or an out-of-region applicant. For WWAMI applicants, it's a 3.0 minimum undergraduate GPA and a 498 MCAT score. For out-of-region applicants, the minimum GPA for undergraduate is 3.25, and the MCAT score is 500. Both categories of applicants rather, need to have at least a 3.0 GPA in the BCPM classes. And then after this point, it goes slightly differently depending on whether you are a WWAMI applicant or out of region. If you are a WWAMI applicant, from this point, you would go to the secondary application. If you are an out-of-region applicant, there is a supplemental section to determine how closely you are aligned with our mission. So for this, there are a couple of different categories of criteria that you need to meet. The first one would be that you have some sort of tie to at least one of the WWAMI states. Again, those are Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho. Those ties can be a variety of different things. Maybe you have family living in one of the states. Maybe you've spent some time living in one of our states yourself. Maybe you've worked here. Various different things are possibilities as what those ties are. The second criterion is that you either come from an economically or educationally disadvantaged background, or you have a record of service to underserved communities. You could have both of these, you could have just one of these last two, but you have to have at least one of these two plus the ties in order to move on to the next step. The next step from there, if you pass through that screen, would be going to the secondary application. So just like the WWAMI applicants go there from the academic screen. And from there, you would go on to the general screening where you have members of our selection committee looking at every individual application and passing it on through that process. And the numbers that we have here for the academic cut are based on historic data. The academics are not, it's not a way to just say, yes, you're in, no, you're not. What we're really looking at here is predictors for how well you'll be able to handle the rigors of our course load. So that's why we have this academic cut. After this academic initial screen, everything is done through a holistic process where we're looking at the entirety of the application, looking at all the different application sections that you submit. If you are rejected based on the metric cutoff in that academic section, you can appeal that. The ways that you would do that would be through replying to the message that you get indicating that you are rejected based on academics, academic cut, and then you would show that you have something along the lines of higher metrics in post-bac work or an upward trajectory, those kinds of things to demonstrate that you really do have the academic background to not struggle with our course load. That's really what, again, we're looking for here is people who are predicted to be successful through managing our course load. Just a quick note, the only time that any part of this process is even moderately done through any sort of automatic process is that academic screening section. And that is basically just our system shows us a list of people who are above or below each of those metrics. And then even that, after we see that, is processed by hand manually by members of our team. Now, how are members of the WWAMI community who apply verified for residency to demonstrate that they really do have, that they meet the residency requirements for whatever they list as their legal state of residence. Each of these rules is based on state legislation in each individual state, so there's nothing we can do to change those. We are following the rules set by state law. Residency for applicants with military service is frequently quite complicated, so please reach out to us if this applies to you and we can give you more information about that. The committee members reviewing your application don't consider any of your residency information, so this is just to determine which section you're applying to, essentially, which cohort or which category, whether you're out of region or a WWAMI applicant. But beyond that, the committee members are not using that to make any decisions about whether you would be invited to interview, whether you would be ultimately accepted. It's not a part of that process at all. It's just to determine what your residency status is according to the documents that you submit and according to what you have listed as your legal state of residence. The timing of the residency submission, if there's any delay in that, is not something that's going to hurt your application. So sometimes you'll see some deadlines, and because of when you're requested to submit additional paperwork, if you are, you may be going over those deadlines to submit that, but that's fine. That's not something that will hurt where you are in the application process, because we know that sometimes it takes longer for us to process things, and when we ask you for more, even if it's after deadline, that's fine. We recognize that that's just part of the process. All the residency verification does have to be manually processed, so there is a great deal of patience that we expect from applications. You do have to think, okay, I'm submitting all this. Someone has to look through all the documents that I just submitted individually for every person who's applying and going through this process. So please be patient with that. And also, it's important to do your best to respond to anything that we send requesting for more materials as quickly as you're able to, so that we're able to keep this process moving ahead and it doesn't delay you unnecessarily. We do have links for residency offices for each of the different states on our website, so you can look there to ask them directly about your process. Our group here, our admissions team, and the University of Washington School of Medicine's residency team are working specifically on Washington because each one is a different state. Each other state has their own residency office. Again, those links are on our website. Thank you very much.
All right. So a little bit about our MCAT and prerequisite requirements. The bottom line is that your academic screen that we mentioned in previous slides is based on your most recent your most recent MCAT score. However, the admissions committee does see all of your MCAT scores historically available during the application review. Generally, when you are working with multiple MCAT scores, the one thing to keep in mind is effectively like, is there a sort of trend when it comes to your MCAT scores? Like, are they gradually improving? Is there a significant change in between scores? Like, was there a sharp decrease in them or anything along those lines? Those are the only sorts of circumstances in which seeing multiple MCAT scores may actually be relevant. But if you only have one MCAT score, or your most recent MCAT score is your best MCAT score, then functionally you have nothing to worry about in terms of seeing your entire MCAT history. When you are applying, you need to either apply with an MCAT score or indicate a future MCAT date on your application, but it must be by September 30th of an application cycle. If you do not indicate this future score and you apply without that, then either we will use your last MCAT that you had available, assuming that you took one before, or if you had not taken any MCATs and you do not indicate a future MCAT date, then we will interpret it as having no MCAT, and your application may be deemed ineligible for the application cycle. So make sure to clarify on your own application where that date is or what that looks like. If you are applying with a pending MCAT score, your application will be held for review until we get this new score. WWAMI, some applicants that are in region will be able to receive information about their residency requirements and be able to fill that out preemptively. But generally speaking, you will have to wait for the other steps in the application until we get that score. That being said, you are still welcome to go on our website and review the secondary questions and start preparing them if you're anticipating that the MCAT score is going to go well. So don't let that hold you back from getting your own preparation in order. Uh, Meanwhile, prerequisites are a little bit more flexible as far as deadlines go. They must be completed by May 15th of 2027, at least for this cycle specifically. So you can apply, uh, you can submit your primary application and your transcripts while you still have some of these prerequisites in progress. Uh, but make sure that once you finish them by May 15th, that you send us a formal transcript update so that we will know that you completed these classes. And in terms of one of the questions that we get sometimes is, do I need to have, like, how many of the prerequisites do I need to have completed by the time that I'm applying? The rule of thumb is don't save all of your prerequisites as being in progress for when you are submitting your primary application, because it does help to have at least some or most of those prerequisites completed and with a grade available to review, because the admissions committee will kind of be looking at your performance in these STEM classes as a sort of indicator of your academic capabilities, as was discussed in the previous slide as well. And then in terms of application review, so as mentioned above, we accept transcript updates and MCAT score updates within the appropriate time frame, but that's basically it. Any updates regarding additional publications, activities, work experiences, etc., they cannot be appended to your file after you submit your application. So make sure that you include everything that you want to talk about or to be reviewed in that initial application. This is done so that it is fair for all applicants. Um, and if you feel like maybe you are going to be doing something very important or very relevant to your application after that initial deadline and you're worried that you won't be able to include it, there may be a chance that you can talk about it at your interview, but realistically, one of the things that we might recommend for folks is to just submit on a future cycle, especially if it's something super consequential. So screening time, once you complete your secondary application, can vary based on your regional site and when you submitted your application. It can be anywhere from a couple of weeks, depending on the timeline, to a couple of months. So don't be worried if you don't immediately get a response right after you submit it. Everybody will eventually get a response because we screen based on the dates of cohort interviews. So we try to prioritize the cohorts that are whose interviews are coming up first. We do not necessarily screen in order of when you submitted in AMCAS. So basically, if you are in a cohort that is going to be interviewing later, such as like in January or February, you might not hear back from us until later on in the season, closer to December or like the end of the year. Uh, However, don't worry, we will still review your application entirely with a focus on evidence and context in a holistic sense. And then you will ultimately hear back from us as soon as we complete it. And then moving on to Alexander with interviews.
Thanks. So, as with most of our process, uh, all the interview scheduling is done by us manually by hand. So there can be delays with that. It can be something where you will have to be a little bit patient. So we do appreciate that. Once we do finish your screening, you'll be invited to interview, but you may not have the opportunity to select your interview date right away. Part of this is because we want you to be able to know as soon as possible that you've been invited to interview, so you're not wondering what your situation is any longer than necessary. But also, we don't have all the interview sites up right away, so you may find out sooner than you're able to interview if you are going to be invited for that. You will receive more information in each case, keeping you updated on what you're able to do and how to do it and how to prepare. We do on our website have information on preparing for your interviews. We also have a list of what the interview weeks are for each cohort. These are all predetermined, so at the very least, you'll know when the possible dates for your interview are. If you're in one of the cohorts where there's only 1 or 2 weeks, make sure that you're keeping those times open. Even if you don't know the exact date yet, you'll know your interview will be during that week. That's something that you will at least be able to know for sure that far. All the interviews are virtual, and the format has 3 people interviewing you. It's going to be a 30-minute period of time that you're interviewing for each of those. You'll get more information throughout this process. A lot of different resources we have on the website, including information about special programs such as CUSP and TRUST. The applicants who are applying for that will receive more details about those as that comes, and you'll have a special section of the application to fill out for those applicants. There's interview day information on our website as well. Those are sessions that you can join, not necessarily having to be on the day that you're interviewing or even the week that you're interviewing, but those are opportunities to join a virtual session to learn more about the school, learn more about the whole process, learn more about who we are and what we have to offer. There are some cases where an emergency comes up and one of your scheduled interviewers may be unavailable at the last minute. So it's possible to have only 2 committee members rather than 3 interviewing you. Don't worry if this happens to you. This is not something that we let negatively impact your application. We're very dedicated to having equity throughout our process and making sure that even in cases like this, everyone who applies and is interviewed gets a fair evaluation just as anyone else would. So don't worry about this. This is something that we keep track of and make sure is not going to negatively affect your application. If you do in any way feel that there's something off about your interview, some kind of issues that you're concerned with, anything happens, if you have technical difficulties, anything like that, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. The sooner you reach out to us, the sooner we're able to address the problem. If you wait too long, it's going to be much more difficult for us to try to remedy any situation or to address any issues.
So one thing we want to make sure you know is that we will not ghost you. We're always going to send you emails about where you are in the process. You'll get emails from us throughout the cycle. So be sure you're watching your email, and if you're not going to have access to your email for an extended period of time, we recommend you have someone checking it so that you don't miss anything important from us. Also want to make sure we emphasize that we make decisions based on the written materials you've submitted and the interview. Equity, as Alexander said, is very important in this process. We want everyone to be considered using the same materials, so we don't accept thank you notes or letters of intent for that reason. That would augment the application and make it different than other people. Also have to emphasize that decisions are final once the emails go out. So the decision that you get is final once you get that email. So again, if anything strange happens in your interview, let us know right away so we can handle that as it comes up. Also, as mentioned earlier, we do have rolling admissions from between October and February, again, depending on your cohort. The timing specifically of when you get information is going to depend on your cohort, and final decisions aren't made on each cohort until every applicant has been interviewed for that cohort. Again, it's part of our the value of equity in our process. Also want to make sure I mention that the University of Washington School of Medicine does not have an early decision program. Every applicant is considered in the same way. So we want to thank you again for joining us today. It is really important to us that our process is transparent. We want you to be able to put your best foot forward when applying to our school. So we try to give a lot of information, and I list here on this slide several opportunities. There'll also be in links under the video, as well as there are links for a lot of the things we've mentioned throughout this video. After you review our materials, our website, and our videos, do feel free to email us at that askuwsom@uw.edu email address. And we want to thank you for taking the time to watch this with us and learn about the 2027 admissions cycle. We know the application process can be exciting and overwhelming, so we hope this video has helped clarify some of those key points about applying to WWAMI and the University of Washington. But again, if any questions do come up, you're always welcome to reach out to us. We're happy to help. On behalf of the admissions team at the University of Washington School of Medicine and the entire WWAMI community, we wish you the very best. Thank you for joining us today.